There are few more controversial issues in education than the role of religion in schools. Despite falling church attendance and growing concerns about a society divided along religious lines, the number of faith schools and academies of a religious character are expanding. Supporters of this development say that the religious ethos of respect for authority, moral values and academic excellence explain their growing popularity. Not surprising, therefore, that minority faiths are taking the opportunity to open their own religious schools. Their opponents argue that more selection by religious affiliation will further divide our fractured multicultural society, and that the presence of religion, both in faith schools and elsewhere in the system, threatens the liberal values of a modern nation. So what is the place, if any, for religion in a 21st century state education system? That's tonight's big debate. Good evening and welcome to the programme. Here to discuss the role of religion in our schools, I'm joined by a formidable panel, a select group of witnesses and representatives of all the major religions, as well as a studio audience of parents, students, teachers, all with their own forthright views on faith and education. We start with faith schools, the collective name for some 7,000 schools of a religious character within the state system. The overwhelming majority are Christian, mostly Church of England or Roman Catholic, but in recent years other faiths have followed suit. There are now 37 Jewish and 7 Muslim schools, plus a handful from the other main faiths. They're popular and very successful, but are they really the way forward for a modern, multi-faith society? Professor Dawkins, you have a root and branch opposition to faith schools. In a free society, why don't parents have every right to send their child to a faith school if they so wish?
First of all, I don't have a root and branch opposition to religious education in the sense of education about religion. I think it's important that children should learn about religion. What I am against is the labelling of children with the religion of their parents when the children are too young to know their own views are. I'm all for children being taught about lots of different religions and then making up their own minds later. What I really object to, and I think it's actually abusive to children, is to take a tiny child and say, you are a Christian child or you are a Muslim child.
And that, in your own words, those schools that do that appall you.
Well, I think that a faith school...
I got you here saying that exclusively religious schools are, quotes, wicked.
Well, I think it is wicked if children are told you are a member of such and such a faith simply because your parents are. Because after all, every child should be able to work out for themselves that it's an accident of birth that they just happen to be born into, say, a Catholic family or a Muslim family.
And for that reason, you oppose faith schools because, in your view, by definition, that's what they're seeking to achieve.
As far as I can tell, by definition, a faith school is propagating one particular faith, and it makes the assumption that the children in that school belong to a particular faith, which is presumably the faith of their parents.
Bishop Peter Price of Bath and Wells, what's your response to that faith schools are actually, and you like faith schools, are in this sense and the ways as defined by Professor Dawkins wicked?
Well, I'd like just to remind us all that the foundation of state education in this country began with Church of England schools. It was the Church of England that in 1811 began the general popular education process, which did not come into the state system until 1905. So there was a huge commitment by the Church of England to reach some of the poorest communities in every part of the nation. So that's where perhaps the state education we are talking about today began for the general public. I'm very encouraged by what Professor Dawkins says about the general debate on religious education.
Yeah, but we're going to come on to the general debate in many different ways. Yeah. Faith schools themselves, are they not as, or why are they not as Richard Dawkins describes them to be?
Well, because they are a place where the debate can take place in a discussion about religion. In the Church of England schools, for example, all points of view are regarded as being valid and need to be there in the debate in religious education in particular. And there is an obligation to teach about other faiths and to have good
But they are driven by your faith, by your belief, that faith is the faith that is the preferred faith, if not the exclusively correct faith?
Well, I would just remind us a little bit about our own culture and our own history. I mean, the history of our country is fundamentally a Christian one. The Church of England and the state are, for good or ill, tied into each other, and that relationship has been a consistent one for many centuries.
Barry Shearman, you chair the Schools Select Committee in the House of Commons. You don't like faith schools. You've just heard an account of the importance of the Church of England in delivering state education. Why are you against faith schools?
I'm not against, I'm wary. I'm not like Richard. I don't think you can reinvent the fact that, as has been said, there's a long history of the Church in this country providing education, and it's something you can't ignore. We are where we are. For years, I think, and I had my children attended Church of England schools, you would hardly know they were particularly religious or faith schools, I have to say, and I think that is the ambience over the years that has developed in the Anglican faith, and I think Catholics follow pretty close. I think we all become a little more worried the more people take their faith seriously. That faith has some central tenets that actually go against some of the most accepted norms that we have in our society.
So, sorry, are you saying, if I understand that correctly, you don't mind faith schools so long as they're not really driven by faith?
Absolutely.
Once they're driven by faith, you object to them very strongly?
Yes, I actually think that is the situation of most ordinary citizens of our country. They're quite relaxed, they quite like the ambience of our culture being basically a Christian society.
So the bishop, because he's kind of liberal and soft and doesn't really say, I believe in God, one God, and only this God, but he says, yes, other things are important. He's kind of okay, yes. But someone who says, I believe in Allah is not okay because they hold it more strongly.
It worries me when I take evidence in my committee or my citizenship inquiry where I found, for example, some of the evidence from the Catholic Church who find it very difficult when they're talking about citizenship to talk about gay people in what I would have thought a balanced way, It worries me when I took evidence from some people from the Muslim faith where I thought that they were talking about women and the rights of women in a way that I find rather unacceptable in modern Britain. So there are certain issues where it does worry me when the faith, as I said, is taken more seriously and more fundamentally. Let me give you an example. Can I give you one example?
No, can I ask you, so we're going to come on to these specific things in a short while.
Right.
So if I can ask you to hold there, and I'll bring in Una Stannard from the... You're a sceptic, very clearly, from Catholic Education Services. Do you have one rule for the Church of England or the Catholic Church and another rule for Muslims?
Well, I can only speak for the Catholic Church, and certainly...
But for faith schools, obviously you speak for the Catholic, but do you believe that all faiths should have the right to faith schools in the same way as you have always had, or for a long time, Catholic Church has had the right to faith schools?
I think there are enormous advantages to having maintained faith schools. If you have maintained faith schools, there is a great degree of transparency and accountability, and the inspection process, for example, by Ofsted, the public reporting, the regulations and so on that are in place, means that it's possible for everyone to get a very good handle on what's going on in those schools. And I would have said also, we have been very pleased to have a history of Catholic schools, of schools that thrive and are popular, and I would say that that possibility should be there for other faiths too. OK, we're going to pick up on a lot of these things. But to highlight some of the specific issues as they arise throughout the programme, I'll be inviting individuals with particularly strong views, we've heard some already, to take their stand at the podium. Our first witness is Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romaine. Dr. Jonathan Romaine is minister at the Maidenhead Synagogue in Berkshire. And you are against faith schools. Some people might think you're a rabbi, you'd be in favour, but you're actually against because you believe they damage social cohesion. In what way?
Yes, well, I am a rabbi, and therefore I do take faith seriously, but I am worried about faith schools that the social consequences, because if you have separate Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu schools, essentially you're segregating the children, you're separating the children, they are growing up in ignorance of each other, and we're going to have a whole generation who simply don't know what each other looks like. And yes, they may know about each other from books, but that's not the same as interacting with each other. And the same goes to parents, of course. If you separate the children, you're separating the parents who don't meet at the school gate, at school plays, at summer fetes, and therefore we're cutting a huge swathe through society, and precisely because it's a multi-faith society, it's important that children know each other and interact together.
And does that, in your view, apply to all faith schools?
Yes, across the board. I mean, for me, faith should come from the home. Schools should be cross-community, where they teach about faith and you learn about each other's history and culture. But the actual indoctrination should come from the home or from weekend schools. Schools should be where you build bridges, not direct barriers. And I say this from a religious point of view, because I strongly believe, as many of the other faiths believe, that you should love your neighbour as yourself. But you can only love your neighbour if you know your neighbour. So it's very important to interact with them.
Respond to what the rabbi said.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that, there's a very real place for, in faith schools, that there must be a range of people who are able to join those schools. And in the tradition of the Church of England, for example, in certain parts of the United Kingdom, there are more Muslims in our schools than there are Christians in our schools. Now, it's a very small number, I grant you, but equally, we work on the principle that there will always be the possibility and the reality of other faiths being part of those schools.
What about the point that the rabbi is making, that actually you don't, almost by definition, because you are generally speaking not, if not entirely exclusive, broadly, predominantly, you're teaching one faith, or the framework is for one faith, and that itself is divisive?
Well, I make no apology for the fact that we have a history of being a Christian nation. From the perspective of the Church of England.
Okay, let me bring the rabbi in on that. You make no apology for that fact, and it's perfectly valid, and not divisive, because you have other faiths at the school.
It's a totally disingenuous point. I mean, most faith schools are exclusively Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, whatever, and it's a religious apartheid society we're creating. I mean, I deliberately sent my children to a normal cross-communal school because I wanted them to sit next to a Christian, play football with a Muslim, do homework with a Hindu, and walk home with a secularist. And that way we will not fragment society.
Richard Dawkins, you want to...
So many of the panel have referred to things like Catholic children, Muslim children. There is no such thing as a Catholic child, no such thing as a Muslim child, at least not young ones. They're too young to know what they are. That's the point I was trying to make earlier.
Do you reject that? If a child happens to be born of Catholic or Jewish or other parents, are they by definition, in your view, Church of England?
Well, I think this is a very important point that Richard is making. If you are Jewish, that is an integral part of being a culture. I believe that to be true of being Muslim and Sikh too. My understanding, in general terms of being Christian, is that choice is much more likely to come into play at some point.
Okay.
However, if you are baptized as a Christian by your parents...
Even if you don't have choice in the matter?
Even if you don't have choice in the matter, at that point you are regarded as a Christian.
Okay, let's pick up on the Richard, on the case of Muslims and Jews, which the Bishop has just said you are actually culturally, by definition, you belong to that culture, and that is, you're defined in that way, and the school is reinforcing your culture.
When you have faith schools, it does seem to me, talking about a Catholic child or an Anglican child, you really are making an assumption which is presumptuous and is, I think, wicked. I don't think you can get out of it by just saying, oh, it's a cultural matter. It isn't a cultural matter. You're being taught doctrine. You're being taught doctrine as your doctrine, as opposed to that other child's doctrine in a different school. That seems to me to be wicked.
Thank you. And I'm going to have to. I'm sure we'll touch on some of this in a moment again. But Dr. Romain, thank you very much indeed. Our next witness is Dr. Mohammed Muqaddam. Dr. Muqaddam is chair of the Association of Muslim Schools and the principal of Madani High School in Leicester. You want to see more Muslim schools, regardless of the impact that the rabbi says they have on social cohesion.
Well, first of all, with respect to the rabbi, I don't think he's looked at the facts and figures in making those comments. When you talk about community cohesion, if you look and compare like with like, children, young children, adults coming out of faith schools are far more likely to integrate, participate, go on to further education, higher education, and those are the facts.
I'm going to bring in on that Barry Shimon. What's your reaction to that? Actually, you're dead wrong.
Well, I don't believe that they are the facts. You can announce they're the facts, but the business I do as a chairman of the Select Committee is to try and discover the facts. I certainly haven't seen those facts. I worry because I think if we started from anew, we wouldn't have faith schools, because what we are finding in our big centres of population in this country, we are finding division.
Dr. Mukadam.
With respect, and if people go take the efforts to go and see Muslim kids in faith schools, and when they go into further and higher education, they'll see for themselves. I mean, I think it would be important if the government could carry out a large-scale research, to find out what the facts are, rather than have this ideological and sometimes very prejudicial debate about whether faith schools are.
Is the chairman of the Select Committee being ideological in this?
Well, I don't think he's got the facts as he claims he has, because I run Muslim schools.
But how do
I'm the chairman of the Muslim schools, and I do visit.
How do you know that when your pupils go out into the world, they are more integrated into the broader community than those Muslims who go to a comprehensive school which doesn't specifically have the Muslim faith built
Well, I can stand here all night and give you lots of examples, but let me just give you one example.
But that's just as anecdotal as his evidence. That's the problem, isn't it?
It is anecdotal, and the reason is because there isn't a wholesale or big research carried out, and it's important that the government does do that so that we can put this to bed once and for all. As Muslims, we have a right to bring up our children in accordance with our beliefs, which have served us over the centuries well. Now, I give you the same right to bring up your children in the way that you want.
What about the rights of the children themselves?
Well, the rights of the children come when they are they're old enough to understand the issues. Until they get to that age, it's the parents' responsibility and
do
duty.
you teach them that atheists should be punished?
You may not share that, but that is my religion. That is the way I've been brought up, and I bring that child into this world. I educate him. I give him everything. It's my right to make sure that I bring him, and I take issue with that. You think that it's wicked? Well, that's your point of view. I know that's going to make him a better human being. And what's missing is, when you talk about faith, you don't look at what faith teaches. First and foremost, what faith teaches is that, listen, you're a human being, so respect your fellow human beings. And I think that's the important point that you don't want to discuss.
What is the penalty for apostasy?
And that is the thing that you fail to discuss, and that's why you've got those prejudicial views about faith.
What is the penalty for apostasy? What do you teach the children will happen to them if they give up the Muslim faith?
Well, let's bring the debate back into Britain.
What is the penalty for apostasy?
I'll tell you what we will do, because we could go down this road a very long way, and it's obviously a very important issue. But I want to bring in some of our audience and those who have first-hand experience. Naja, you are Muslim, but you don't go to a Muslim school?
No.
Are you better off as a result or worse off?
To be honest, personally, I think I'm better off, because I have an experience of different faiths, different people, and people who I wouldn't have met if I'd gone to a Muslim school, or a single faith, single sex school. I wouldn't have met a Rastafarian, I wouldn't have met a Jew or a Buddhist. And when I speak to them, they have their views and I have mine, and I wouldn't have the skills I have to talk to different people about different issues.
Have you got friends who are Muslim who are at exclusively Muslim schools?
Yeah, I have.
Do you think they suffer, or do they feel... is there some way in which they are missing something?
I think when they lack confidence in public speaking, but I don't think I can say, oh, that's because they go to a Muslim school. But I also find that they're either become very practicing, very devout Muslim, or the complete opposite and just reject the faith because it's been so hounded in them, completely from being child and going to school. It's constantly being Muslim, do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. However, I think that is because of the way it's been taught, not because of the Muslim school, because of the religion itself. I think that because you'll find most Muslim schools, especially in Bradford, are more cultural and are not so much Islamic. Because you'll find that a lot of the things they get taught come from their cultural background, and most of the time it is a Pakistani thing, for a Pakistani background, and that is what affects them more than the actual religion.
Very interesting. I bring in now Sinead. You are a At a Catholic school?
Yeah.
Do you feel yourself to be integrated at a Catholic school, or do you feel that you are in some way isolated from other faiths or non-faiths in a way that is not helpful?
Not at all, because I've always gone to a Catholic school, and I think that as a young person, being around other Catholics has developed my faith and given me my own principles, morals and beliefs, which I think is a great thing for me. And I don't think, and part of the Catholic teaching has actually made me, more tolerant towards other religions, which, the Catholic faith does teach you to be civil to one another. And also we learn about other religions in our syllabus, which I think is very, very important, and it gives us a basis to know, which I don't think you would get if you went to a comprehensive school. I go to many other places and I meet other people. I've met many Jews, many Muslims, many different people, and I've been able to get on with them due to part of the teaching that I get at Catholic school, and also I just get on with them. They're still people at the end of the day, despite their faiths, and I think that's very, very important.
I want to bring in Jay Lakhani. You've been listening to this debate. You're director of the Hindu Academy.
Indeed, yes.
What's your take?
You see, first of all, we hear the language tolerate people of other religion. We also hear the word now being bandied about saying learning to respect people of other religion. This is a red herring, because in reality what they mean is this: we are right and they are wrong, but we won't make a fuss about it at the moment. They'll find out soon enough when they die. So this is really at the moment, the way the faith schools are kind of run is the way they're presenting faiths themselves are very exclusivist, very divisive, and I would say something that should not be funded with public money.
We must pause it there with a thank you to Dr. Mohammed Makadam for joining us there, and to say that for the moment is so much for faith schools. What about the rest of the state system? Is it time to change the law and make these schools truly secular? That's after the break. Welcome back. While faith schools dominate the debate about religion in schools, they are only part of the story. Faith is alive and well in the rest of the state system in the form of compulsory religious education and a daily act of collective worship of a broadly Christian nature. With faith schools serving the needs of children of the devout, are these legacies of the 1944 Act an anachronism that's overdue for reform? Our next witness is Andrew Copson. Andrew Copson is the Director of Education at the British Humanist Association, and he leads their campaign on religion in schools. No parent is required to send their child to participate in an act of collective worship at a state school, so what's the problem?
Well, there are two problems. First of all, you say no parent is compelled to do so, but of course it is the parent's choice and not the child. There are plenty of children who are compelled to engage in religious worship, though they may not wish to do so. And the second problem is that really we don't believe that any parent should have to make the choice. Many parents, certainly the parents who come to us for advice, don't want their child to seem different, maybe feel marginalised and alienated in that way.
Let me, on that, bring in Bishop Peter, you've got your faith schools. Why should everyone else be compelled to endure, if they don't want to, an act of collective worship? You seem to want your cake and eat it.
Well, I think it's, I mean, it is still a part of the Act, and in the review of the Act, it wasn't removed. I continue to believe...
The question is, given that that is the case, why should it be the case? Because you obviously support it.
Well, I support it to this degree, that I think there is merit in people gathering together. There is merit in people experiencing worthship, that is, both of each other and of wider values that may be part of a tradition. And in this country it is a Christian tradition.
But forgive me, an act of worship is, you could come up with all sorts of definitions, but it's effectively an act of devotion or reverence to a supernatural deity, in the case of our schools, a Christian deity. It's not getting together and saying how much you want to understand each other.
No, that's right. And, I mean, of course, I've sat in many school assemblies, I've led many school assemblies. I fully accept that this is a very difficult issue, but I at the same time think that there is some merit in actually giving people space for reflection, even if at the end of the day they're not able to agree with or make the worship in the way that I might.
That's very interesting. You're not making a very powerful case by your own account for having an act of worship. You're making a good case for saying you should get together and reflect and participate in a communal event.
Yes.
Which is very different from what the law requires.
Well, the law requires a broadly Christian perspective.
You're almost saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you wouldn't object, actually, if a school said, well, actually, we want to have a humanist act of collective, whatever it would be, reflection.
Well, as you know, I take the view that we belong to a Christian culture. I think we should never apologise for that. And therefore,
Muslim doesn't belong to a Christian culture. Hindu doesn't belong to a Christian culture.
But the
Jew doesn't belong to a Christian
cultural
culture.
reality of this nation is a Christian culture. We may have all sorts of different groups of people within that culture, and right the way through from the Elizabethan settlement, the responsibility of the monarch, therefore for the church, has been to protect the well-being of the minority bodies within the country. It had always been that there have been minority groups within the nation, and our perspective is quite distinctly, very clearly Christian.
But are we we're dodging the fact that we do have a state religion in England. It's unique. It is, isn't it? It's unique. And the fact of the matter is, you're quite right. A lot of schools, the evidence given to our committee by the Chief Inspector of Schools this morning, many schools don't even carry act of worship at all.
And it could easily define the law, technically.
Of course, they define law. It could easily be replaced by a non-religious, humanist experience having certain values in common.
Let me bring in Dr. Indrajit Singh, not least from the Sikh Messenger. What is your perspective on this?
Well, first of all, can I just broaden it a little bit? Because everything we've heard this evening applies only to the Abrahamic religions, and we're being sort of pushed into that, where we're not there at all. I agree with many of the points Professor Dawkins makes. I agree with many of the criticism, but when you talk about faith, the Abrahamic faiths all have this in common. They are exclusivist. They all feel that they have a special relationship with God. With Sikhs it is totally different.
In that context, what would you do about in this country, about the collective act of worship? Because it's clear that if Parliament wished to change the law, Parliament could change the law.
It has, in fact, become virtually meaningless with people of different religions within the school, and it ought to be replaced by a common reflection on ethical issues.
Let me bring in Catherine Weddell. Catherine Weddell, who's here. What's your thought?
My feeling is that there should be collective reflection at school, that collective worship has no place in state secular schools. I agree with Professor Dawkins that indoctrination into a faith and the assumption that students are going to be of a certain faith is inappropriate. However, I agree wholeheartedly with our last speaker, who said that I feel that an active collective
reflection should have a more central place in schools.
It sounds to me, from what I'm hearing so far, that we're doing a very British thing of having this thing we call a collective act of worship. No one takes it terribly seriously in its formal terms, but it's quite a good way of a school getting together. Luis Nayusi, what's your view in the back row?
I think there should be an act of collective worship, because this is one of the ways through which we can have integration and also teach other children of other faiths about our own faith.
When you say our faith, your faith is?
For example, I teach in a Catholic school, and we have a general worship. And through this, some children who do not belong to the Catholic faith or do not practice the Catholic faith, they are able to learn about what the Catholics believe and practice. And the children themselves who are Catholic also broaden their faith through that act of worship.
And Andrew Copson, is it such a big deal?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a big deal for two reasons. Now, you say that many schools don't comply with the law, and that's true of secondary schools. Most of them don't. 90% of primary schools do comply with the law, and of course that means that it is still a problem. The other reason why it's a problem is that the law as it exists prevents the development of better practice. You know, we know that good assemblies, good inclusive assemblies can build school community, can increase ethos, can be educationally and developmentally useful for children. But as long as this law exists on the statute book and we have to sort of cough and sort of defend it, and bishops have to say, oh, well, a sort of, worthship or whatever, and play with words, that best practice isn't going to develop.
Let me bring you on to the other aspect of religion in schools. Are you, as root and branch, opposed to religious education being taught at schools?
Well, religious education, unlike worship, has come on a lot conceptually in the last 60-odd years since the Education Act.
So are you happy with it as it stands?
No, I'm not happy with it as it stands.
What's wrong?
I think, well, there are various... in many ways, it's still a throwback to an earlier time, in that, for a start, it's not on the national curriculum, which makes it incredibly difficult to regulate it. It also fails to adequately include the views of what, according to some surveys, the vast majority of 12 to 19-year-olds, which are non-religious perspectives on questions of meaning and purpose and value, and it needs to include those a lot more. It needs to become a lot more comprehensive of various secular and religious responses to these questions.
I would resist the temptation to go down the road of having a national curriculum for religious education, because local need does need to be taken into account. The local communities need to be reflected in the learning that goes on. I think one of the things that we do need to bear in mind in all of these issues is it is extremely complex. I mean, people have talked about the importance of learning about other faiths. One of the dimensions of religion in school, or faith in school, is learning from other faiths and worldviews. And good RE does incorporate, I mean, it has to incorporate the needs and the views of the children and young people in the classroom, including those of no religious faith or who are uncertain.
Is it your view that all RE should exclude any proselytizing for one particular faith?
Yes, very much. All religious education should exclude proselytizing.
Richard Dawkins, from your perspective, presumably you wouldn't be entirely opposed at all to the idea.
I would be thoroughly in favour of education in the Bible as literature. You can't understand English literature without the Bible. You can't take your allusions. And that's an aspect of what the bishop was saying. Is absolutely right. This is a Christian country. Historically, it's a Christian country. You can't understand English history or English literature without a knowledge of the Bible. And by the way, I think I should say that the act of collective worship, I don't approve of it, but nevertheless, the Christian religion, especially I think the Anglican religion, is benign by comparison. If a child at the end of its school career wants to give up religion, the church will quite happily say, okay, go your own way. The penalty for apostasy in the Christian religion is not death. There is no penalty for apostasy at all in the Christian religion. The Christian religion is comparatively benign, and we should respect it as such.
Let me bring in, we've got teachers in this audience who do religious education from different... Yes, in the back with the glasses.
Kate, I'm head of RE in a comprehensive school. Well, I don't see the problem. I mean, the kids love it. You've got to learn about religion. You've got to learn about the rocks, the rivers and the mountains of the world. You've got to learn about other people. I mean, and even more so, day by day, we have got to know about other people.
And are you absolutely, in terms of any faith, neutral about the relative merits of any faith?
Oh yes, I'm an atheist, so I guess maybe inside I think I'm right. But I mean, my school's
So you are not normative, though, in the application of your intellect to the class.
I don't know. I probably shouldn't say that because I probably am a little. But we're not apologetic. We're not confessional. I mean, the heart of RE is faith, kind of, and there is a problem there because we only do really learn about, and so you know, this faith thing. That comes back to the problem of collective worship and the problem of faith schools.
Una, just quick thought on this. Should all religious education in schools be entirely free of the individual preference of the school or the individual belief system that the school has adopted?
I think if you're a school with a religious character, an intrinsic part of that religious character is actually teaching that faith. But I think the word that you've got to keep in mind all the time is education. And education, by very definition, gives people an opportunity to reflect, discuss, share their thoughts and struggles. It doesn't mean in good religious education that there is any space for saying you can't have a view and you can't share it. And in Catholic schools, that's what I expect going on, and I expect that they're learning about other faiths as well.
Are they all getting down the road that you'd like them to get down, having heard this discussion, Andrew Colson?
I think religious education has come on quite a lot in the past in our community schools, and I think it'll probably develop a lot in the future. I think it is a problem to try and apply those same... I think what we need to do is try and apply those same principles of good religious education to faith schools within the state system as well, though.
Thank you very much.
Do you think there ought to be trained people doing it? On my visits to school, I find far too many people untrained conducting religious education, and that is very, very dangerous.
We will pause there after the break. Does a belief in God offer the best framework for teaching moral values to our school children, or does religious conviction too easily come into direct conflict with a free and open society? That's in a moment. Welcome back. It's often claimed that religion is the best way to communicate moral values to children, and that without it, they won't understand the difference between right and wrong. Others, however, argue from the opposite, that the opposite is true, suggesting that religious values are actually in conflict with the moral values of modern Britain. Bishop Peter, it would be arrogant, wouldn't it, to suppose that somehow a belief in God gives you unique access or special access to the principles of right and wrong in a secular society?
The making of any kind of boundaries in a society depends upon the need for a cohesion in that society. And the Ten Commandments, for example, which have been the foundational documents for Jewish and Christian faiths and have been influential in others, were essentially in order to give society some cohesion. To my mind, there is a greater value in the concept of a God-shaped series of values, because we're called back to something that is beyond ourselves, and that's often very important.
Richard Dawkins, does a God-shaped perspective or set of values do any harm to the way in which children should be taught at schools? Right?
Thou shalt have no other God before me, thou shalt make no graven image, thou shalt keep the Sabbath holy. What on earth's that got to do with anything to do with morals? That's the 10 Commandments, or at least 3 of them. It would be deeply depressing if the only way children could get moral values was from religion, either from Scripture, and God knows we don't want them to get it from Scripture, I mean, just look at Scripture, or from a kind of God, being intimidated by God. Anybody who is good for only those 2 reasons is not really being good at all. Why not teach children things like the golden rule, do as you would be done by? How would you like it if other children did that to you? So why do you do it to them?
So God is not only irrelevant, God is damaging.
I didn't say God was damaging, but I think it's depressing that anybody should suggest that you actually need God in order to be moral. I would hope that our morals come from a better source than that, and that therefore they are genuinely moral, rather than based on outmoded Scripture or based on fear.
Una Stannard. Let me bring in Una Stannard.
I think sometimes it's easier to talk in terms of human values, and then to think about the lens that your faith makes you look at them and act on them. So, for instance, if I take my Christian faith and my Catholic religion, I am left in absolutely no doubt that life is precious, that everybody I encounter is equal in the eyes of God, and that reconciliation is something I may not always, at an emotional level be keen on doing, but I have it as my duty and my responsibility within my faith. So I think religion is what you apply and act with those human values.
Okay, that's a clear sort of opening set of views. Let me come to our next witness on this. Maryam Namazi was born in Iran before her family left in the wake of the Islamic revolution. You are part of the British Council of Ex-Muslims. I presume that you believe religious principles are not entirely helpful to developing moral values.
No, I actually think that oftentimes religious principles are actually quite immoral, to be quite frank. And I think that if you look at examples where girls are sexualized at a very young age, for example, if you look at Islamic schools where they're forced to veil, where they're taught that they're different from boys, where they're not allowed to listen to music, where they're completely segregated, and many such examples like that. I think, in fact, if there is any good morality that comes out of even religious education, it's not because of religion, it's oftentimes despite religion, and it's the result of an enlightenment and a vast social movement for 21st century values that have had an effect on religion as well.
Let me bring in, I will come to you in a moment. Let me bring in Mohammed Muqaddam in response to that. I don't want to misreport, but at Muslim schools, the girls are put into a position where they are diminished as human beings.
Well, that's often the case where people are ignorant of what goes on in faith schools and Muslim schools. The fact is, our schools are run along a legal lines. They treat both sexes equally, provide them with the best opportunities. So it's often a case of people who have prejudices and ignorance.
Mariam?
I mean, I think it's typical of Islamic schools and the political Islamic movement to label any criticism a sort of prejudice and thereby racism, thereby trying to make people silent on criticizing it. I think the issues are very clear. I mean, the head of the Islamia school, for example, was quoted in an interview saying that you're born a Muslim, you're always Muslim, you can't leave, and that's things that have been told to me untold times for having renounced religion and Islam. There is threats, there is intimidations. Just yesterday, a 16-year-old girl was killed by her father for refusing to wear the veil. I think Islamic schools very much do suppress and restrict girls. Of course I did. I lived under the Islamic Republic of Iran.
The father who killed, did he go to an Islamic school?
I think Islamic schools, the problem with all faith schools, let me be clear that I have a problem with all faith schools, because I think if Catholic schools are a little more tame, it's because the Enlightenment has tamed them. I agree with Richard Dawkins that children do not have a religion. They shouldn't be labelled as any religion. They should be labelled human, and that is the best way to safeguard children's rights.
Pause there for a second while I bring in Nadja, because you touched on this before. Do you, I mean, you are wearing the veil, you're a Muslim. What is your response to what you've just heard?
I'm 16. I wear the hijab because I want to wear it, and I'm here. I'm out of my home. I'm doing well in school. I do a lot of stuff out of school. Nowhere does my religion stop me from doing what I want to do and be myself and expressing myself.
There's a confusion here. You are assigning to religion what is actually, if Nadja is right, a cultural phenomenon.
We have enough examples in the 21st century to know that it has everything to do with religion. And I mean, I think that obviously there are women, and I think with children it's a very different issue. The veil is a form of child abuse in my opinion. But for adult women, I think they have a right to wear it. She's 16.
She's an adult, and therefore she isn't being abused
no,
by wearing
well, this is the thing. I mean, there might be people who don't. I think, socially speaking, the veil is very often imposed on women. And I think the problem with the thing about education is that it has to help children have access to information, be able to question. And I think the problem with religion is it's actually very restrictive and prescriptive and doesn't allow people to question, because these are the rules and you have to adhere by them.
You said just now, and I want to bring in there for Una Stannard, that other religions maybe were softer, but that you had the same underlying objection. You are opposed to abortion. Abortion is a mortal sin in the Catholic faith. What do you say to a 16-year-old girl who's come to you and says, I've had an abortion?
Well, we believe that all life is precious, it's God-given, but a young girl in the circumstances you're talking about, like anybody else in challenging circumstances or circumstances where behaviours may not have been in accordance with our beliefs, still deserves our love and our care, and that's what would happen. That's what would be given.
And says to the Catholic school, are you telling me I've committed a mortal sin? And the answer to that has to be yes, which is, I'm suggesting, is really out of kilter with social values that many people think that young person should be able to free to adopt.
Well, you keep referring to us being a secular society, Jonathan, and I would also, just want to put down a marker that I contest that. Mm-hmm. I would say that we don't support abortion. I make no apology for that, but if we wanted to put it very tritely, I suppose I would say, whatever the sin, you always love the sinner, and you give them support, and there is always hope in the Christian faith.
Barry Sherman, is there a tension for you between the religious values on the one hand? We've heard a couple of examples, and maybe touch on another one in a moment, between that and the principles of right and wrong that a socially cohesive society needs to develop?
I think that there is, but I said very early on in this discussion that religion and each faith has a wide spectrum, and what worries me is when I do visit Muslim schools that I often see a religion that is quite an extreme version of Islam. I have Muslims in my constituency and in West Yorkshire who set up their own informal schools because of the profound influence, particularly a part of that religion that comes from Saudi Arabia, and they don't like that. So we've got to be very cautious about what faith is, how it impinges, what part of the faith, what part of the Anglican faith in terms of the evangelical wing in certain schools in this country.
Well, I was going to come exactly to Bishop Peter. So there is a conflict between many in your church's attitude towards homosexuality, the practice of homosexuality, and society's views about homosexuality. If you're taking schools and young people who say to themselves, I am gay, and they want to practice homosexuality, they get into some difficulties with many who hold your faith, which makes one wonder, is there not now a mismatch between the social values of this country, because you talked a lot about the origins of our social values, and the values that are held by a great many in your church, and actually causing great schism.
Yes, I mean, But the point about it is that there is a debate taking place. That's the difference, I think, that there's no lack of debate in schools on this question. There's no attempt to kind of muzzle the debate or muzzle people speaking for themselves in their sexuality and declaring.
But if let me put it, so you're a teacher at school, and a boy comes to you, 16-year-old boy, and says, "I'm gay, and I have sex." Yeah. What is your view of what I'm doing? What's your response?
Well, if I'm a teacher, I think I have to be very careful what my view is, because one of the things you have to say at that point is, as we've said earlier on, and when I was a teacher and I taught RE in a state school, not as an ordained person but as just as a layman, young people did come and talk that through with me. And the point I wanted to do all the time was to help them to discover who they were at that particular point in time. It wasn't my role to make a judgment upon them in that situation. It's not the role of education to help people to make judgments on people. It is to listen to where they are coming from. And as Richard has said, there comes a point where a young person is going to have to make up his mind whether that tradition, the Anglican tradition, the evangelical Anglican tradition, or indeed the mainstream Anglican tradition's position is one which it can live with, that young person can live with, or whether they're going to have to reject it because they really do believe that is wrong.
But you've asserted generally that given the tradition of this country's education system, given the role of the Church, of the Church of England, there is a society which is essentially Judeo-Christian, and that those values are represented by the Church. Some of the issues we've been discussing suggest that actually those values are no longer represented by the Church, and that at the very least will confuse children, young people, about what values they should adopt.
Well, the Church of England has always taken the view that marriage between a man and a woman, bringing up children within that environment, is a God-given order.
Given that's the case, and of course that's a perfectly respectable view to hold, as no one would deny the right to hold it, should it be the view that predominates in the teaching of values to children at school?
Well, it is a view that is put in education. The issue of homosexuality is discussed within religious education. There is the opportunity for a wide debate to take place. If the perspective is put that the Church of England takes this particular line, equally, it has to be said that there are those within the Anglican communion who do not take, and indeed within the Church of England who do not. So it is an ongoing question.
General thoughts from our audience.
Picking up with respect to what Sir Richard Dawkins said.
He's not knighted yet. I expect he will be. He's a mere professor at the moment.
Professor Dawkins said, if a child is born into a family given a certain religion, when that child growing up basically knows more about their religion, and as they grow up they learn about other religions and choose, and they can...
Are you saying that the fact that you're brought up within a religious faith doesn't prevent you being open-minded or adopting any religion or none?
Not at all. It does not prevent me from being open to other religions. I, in fact, have come to this country and chose to put the veil on. I have come to this country without a veil on.
So not so very wicked is the view.
But what is the penalty for apostasy? What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith?
To be honest, I cannot back that point up.
Dr. Mukadam, what is the penalty for apostasy?
And, before...
we keep coming down this apostasy. Give us a quick answer on what is the penalty for apostasy, and then we'll come on the audience point.
You very well know, if it's an Islamic country, then the Sharia is very clear. Apostasy is dealt with the death penalty.
Thank you, that's all I want to hear.
But what's the relevance between what happens in an Islamic country and Great Britain? I fail to see the connection.
Okay, I'm going to bring some more voice. The woman who's second in the middle row wearing the blue top, yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back to the discussions we were having earlier about abortion and homosexuality. And really, I'd like to know when it became the case that we can fight really hard for our rights as women and gay people, and then we win the laws and, in very hard-fought battles, and then in school, children with no choice as to hear, as to what viewpoint they're hearing, get to hear you get to do whatever you like. And, you know, in a very small minority, you know, the fact is, unfortunately, you didn't win Section 28. You didn't keep that in, and you didn't win the rules on abortion 40 years ago. And we won the right to access abortion in this country. And I think it is... I don't understand why it's allowed, like, what is the argument for you being allowed to tell young people one thing when actually society has democratically decided another thing over here? We live in a democracy here.
And we're all part of that democracy, and if we're providing good education, we're still part of the democracy. We're broad and diverse communities, and in any good education, as I've said earlier, you teach what you believe in the case of a confessional Catholic school, but you give people the opportunity to hear other views and to consider different points of view.
The woman in the middle row here, you may still be at school, I don't know.
Kerry. Yeah, in our school, I go to Catholic school, and we are taught about abortion, but we're taught about the Catholic views to abortion, all other Christian attitudes to abortion, and all the world faiths and smaller religions' attitudes to abortion. We are told the Catholic view, and we are told what it is, and we decide ourselves whether it's right or not. Our school, because we are a Catholic school, we have the right to say what the Catholic view is on abortion because we believe in the sanctity of life.
Are your fellow pupils at the school, having discovered the various views, are they perfectly free to say, well, actually, I now favour abortion, and I'm no longer going to take the view of the school?
Yes, many of my friends.
Without any pressure?
Yeah, without any pressure, because our lessons are structured with their debates. You're never pressured into believing the Catholic faith. You're always having a debate.
From the back row with glasses.
One of the things that strikes me about the discussion is that it seems that we're frightened of robust discussion of religious differences. And I think what I've heard from the pupils here who are in Catholic and Muslim schools is that they revel in that. And that's what religious education offers. And I think we've got a lot of adults who are very frightened of religion. What we need is the balanced discussion of passionate religious commitment in schools so that people can make up their own minds.
One more brief point at the back.
I think the how of social, moral, cultural education is the education aspect is to ask open questions and to enable students, as our participant over here said, to enable students to take part in debate and discussion. Part of education is to express your view and justify it in open questions.
Thank you very much. On that issue of open questions, we come to the closing of these questions. Thank you to our panel here, to our specialists, to the audience. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.